Let's get a sense of what's happening internationally in the press. And while the violence that's been taking place across France appears to be abating, it's still very much the sense of tension around the country. It's getting headlines all over the world after nearly a week of rioting. Our press reviewer, Leo McGuinn, is with us now. Leo, just how is the whole protest being covered around the world?
Yeah, look, Gavin, as you'd expect, there's room for little else in the French press this morning. We'll start with Libération, the left-leaning Libération. You can see these images here. That's from Nanterre itself, where the violence, of course, started last Tuesday. They pose a very simple question on their front page. They say, how do we get ourselves out of this situation? What can actually change in France? And not just short term, but long term, so this doesn't happen again. They talk about the toxic relationship between the police and young people, and that's what it's really down to. That's what they say in their piece inside there. Speaking of change, I want to show you this article in Le Monde. They have this from their North African correspondents. They have a look at the North African papers and see how they've reacted to this. Specifically, the death of Nael, who, of course, was of North African descent. The headline here says that if France continues to marginalise the Maghreb community, that is the North African community in France, then these scenes will just repeat themselves over and over again. They report what the Algerian paper Al Kabar says. They have a headline that says, France once again refuses to recognise its faults. They say France is ignoring its violent colonialist past, which is leading to these divides in society. The right-leaning Le Figaro have a very different take on it. They have the police on the front here, and they're very much leaping to the defence of the police, saying that they've faced barbaric violence over the last few days. They've become targets since the start of the rioting. They say those responsible of the rioting are mainly irresponsible kids, encouraged by a few irresponsible leftists, as they call it, who are blowing on the embers of the fire. I'll show you one more front page from France this morning. This is from Le Soir. They say that France's image as a whole has been tarnished by these riots, not only by the riots, but of course what they call a winter of social discontent. Of course, they're referring to the protests over the pension reforms, and they say that France's reputation has taken real damage, and they say living in France at the moment is like living on the edge of a volcano, and it could erupt at any moment.
I was in Nanterre at the weekend. I was taking calls from the press in India, in the US. If you look on any headline, any newspaper, TV, social media, despite the 600 application on Twitter at the moment, it is there all the time. Now, another story might not have got through all the headlines is this scandal in cricket in the UK. The idea of saying it's just not cricket, it's not fair, goes out the window. Argy-bargy, bizarre scenes.
Argy-bargy, bizarre scenes indeed, Gavin. And look, it's very rare that sports makes the headline on the front page in the UK. Even rarer still that it's cricket. But that's the case this morning. If we look at all the papers, I'll start with a few more right-leaning ones. We have the Mail here, and there's a very common word that keeps on cropping up. Cheat. Aussie cheats is what they call them. If we look at the Express as well, they say Australia caught in cheat row. And the Metro as well say they use that phrase that you use, Gavin. It's just not cricket. But not just those papers. If we look at the Times and the Guardian, they have it on the front pages as well. You can see Ben Stokes there, and we'll look at the Guardian. And this all centres around an incident that happened in the second Ashes Test between England and Australia at Lord's yesterday. Johnny Bairstow was dismissed in very contentious circumstances, but that's when it really kicked off. The players went off the field for lunch. They went through the famous long room at Lord's, which is really famous for its etiquette, and it's quite quiet, and that's the sense of famous cricket heritage. Not yesterday, though, where it got very feisty. The Guardian, you can see here, are reporting that the MCC, which is Lord's, have suspended 3 of their members for their clash with the Australian cricket team inside that famous long room, which is quite simply never seen before. And those 3 members won't be allowed back to Lord's until the conclusion of the investigation. Look, after all that, Australia went on to win a thrilling encounter by 43 runs and a 2-0 up in the Ashes with 3 games to play. So after all, Australia really did have the last laugh, Gavin.
Yeah, I think it's like seeing something from a bizarre Monty Python sketch when you see the MCC members booing and shouting, saying, shame. Leo McGuinn, thank you for our press review. Stay with us here on France 24. We'll be back in a few moments with all the headlines and continuing on the story and observations, what's going on after those riots in France. 6 successive nights of trouble, but it seems so far to be calming last night. Stay with us here on France 24.